This video discusses issues in the periodization of Beethoven's musical career and the composer's deafness. It also introduces music of what might be called Beethoven's middle heroic period. After watching it, please proceed to your score analysis, other readings, and other videos about Beethoven's musical works of this time. Scholars have traditionally divided Beethoven's composing into three chronological periods: early, middle, and late. Like all efforts to categorize, this one proposes boundaries that might be debated. Probably most controversial is the dating of the end of the middle period and the beginning of the late period. Beethoven did not compose much music between 1814 and 1818, meaning that any division of those years would fall more on Beethoven's life than on his music, always a controversial issue. Many scholars, however, have gone further and objected to the entire classifying scheme. The Grove Music Online article, which was organized by Joseph Kerman, is informative on this topic. You might also note that Lewis Lockwood's biography of Beethoven uses the term maturity rather than period, perhaps to counter the fact that an early, middle, late scenario is easily turned into an evolutionary trajectory where later music is automatically considered better than earlier music. Further questions arise when developments in Beethoven's musical style do not always match up with important developments in genre. For example, the Opus 13 Pathetique Sonata, composed between 1798 and 1799, shows stylistic similarities with music composed during Beethoven's middle period, although, as a form and genre, it is more similar to his earlier works. Finally, there are always cases when subsets of periods are more striking than the period designation itself. Something of the sort is at work in the middle years of the first decade of the 19th century. Much of Beethoven's music at this time, his Eroica Symphony, his first version of his opera Fidelio, and the Fifth Symphony, in particular, proclaims what is most often referred to as a heroic style. The music of the years 1803 to 1812 contains music of a variety of styles. Calling the middle period the heroic period does run the risk of marginalizing music from this period which is less influenced by ideals of heroism than by other themes. Perhaps the most universally known fact of Beethoven's life is that he went deaf, and you can read entire books on the topic. For our present purposes, the most important thing is the timing. It was at the end of the 1790s that Beethoven first recognized that he was losing his hearing. By 1801, he was writing about it to his most trusted friends, Carl Amenda and Franz Wegeler. It is clear that the loss of his hearing prompted an existential crisis for Beethoven. During the fall of 1802, Beethoven composed his last will and testament, a document that we've come to know as the Heiligenstadt Testament. It is named after the small town of Heiligenstadt, north of the Viennese city center, where Beethoven was staying at the time. The Heiligenstadt Testament provides us a window into Beethoven's heart and mind. Make sure you read it either on the course website or via the internet. Most striking is his statement in the Testament that his experiences of social alienation connected to his hearing loss, quote, drove me almost to despair. A little more of that and I would have ended my life. It was only my art that held me back, end quote. The idea that Beethoven found in art a reason to live suggests both his valuing of art and a certain self-awareness of what he had to offer music. Beethoven and his physicians tried various means to counter his hearing loss and improve his ability to function in society. He, for example, had an ear trumpet. By 1818, however, Beethoven was completely deaf. We have conversation books that he used to communicate with visitors from around that time. Beethoven most often verbally articulated his answers to the questions posed in the pages within these books. The famous account of Beethoven having to be turned around to witness the cheers of the audience comes from an 1824 concert at the Kärntner Tor Theater. Beethoven, as we know, recovered from his depression of around 1800 and went on to compose some of his best-known works during what has often been called his middle period. They include his symphonies 3 through 8, famous piano works such as the Waldstein, Appassionata, and Lebewohl sonatas, and the 4th and 5th piano concertos. He also wrote his opera Fidelio. It was first performed in 1805 and then extensively revised for an acclaimed new production in 1814. Beethoven continued to write instrumental chamber music, choral music, and songs. Beethoven is often regarded as having come into his own in these middle period works. These works display a new and original musical style that is sometimes referred to as Beethoven's heroic style. In contrast to the works of Haydn and Mozart and his own earlier music, these longer compositions feature larger performing forces, thicker polyphonic textures, more complex motivic relationships, more chromaticism and delayed resolutions, more syncopation and hemiola, and more elaborate forms. A first focus composition is Beethoven's Third Symphony, begun in the country village of Oberdubling in the summer of 1803 and finished in 1804. By the end of 1803, Beethoven had expressed intentions to call the work his Bonaparte Symphony, based on his understanding of Napoleon Bonaparte as the hero who was leading Republican France toward a future of liberty and equality. As Beethoven was soon to discover, in actuality, Napoleon was tightening his grip on France and would shortly embark on repeated campaigns to bring all of Europe under his control. Sometime after December of 1804, Beethoven scratched out Napoleon's name on his manuscript copy of the symphony. When published in late 1806, the title page called the symphony a heroic symphony composed to celebrate the memory of a great man. After being rehearsed at the Lobkowitz Palace, the Symphony No. 3 had its public premiere at the Theater an der Wien in April of 1805. To quote one early critic, its strange modulations, violent transitions, and inordinate length amounted to it being despised by a certain proportion of its earliest audiences. It is true that the first movement of the symphony is longer than many entire symphonies by Mozart and Haydn. The Third Symphony's finale does combine dissonant fanfares and both learned and light-hearted variations on a bass line and theatrical term in a way that was clearly a bit shocking for its period audiences. Today, performances of the Symphony No. 3 rarely shock, as they obviously did their first listeners. Interpretations of the symphony as embodying heroism, however, have not ceased since Beethoven's day. For an excellent review of this tradition, see Scott Burnham's book entitled Beethoven Hero. Symphonies 3, 5, and 6 were premiered at the Theater an der Wien. It was located just to the south and west of the Viennese city walls. Today's Staatsoper, which is the huge hall constructed by Semper in the 1880s that took the place of the Burgtheater, is just a few blocks to the north and east of the site. The photos show depictions of the exterior and interior of the Theater an der Wien. I've tweaked this map from a late 20th century tourist guide to show the locations of Beethoven's primary concert venues in Vienna. The star indicates the Theater an der Wien. The X marks the site of the old Kärntner Tor Theater, where the Ninth Symphony, among others, was premiered. The site currently is occupied by the luxurious Hotel Sacher. An oval draws your attention to the site of the old Burgtheater, where Beethoven's first public concert was held. The premieres of the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies, alongside many other important Beethoven works, took place at perhaps the most infamous of all of Beethoven's concerts. This concert lasted for some 4 hours in the unheated Theater an der Wien on a bitterly cold night. Sometime during November of 1808, Beethoven had made the orchestra of the Theater an der Wien very angry. They apparently refused to be conducted by the composer or even to have him in the room during rehearsals. One vocal soloist refused to perform because of a quarrel with Beethoven, and her inexperienced replacement was apparently so intimidated that she sang poorly. Finally, the choral fantasy, which closed the program, was finished too late to be sufficiently rehearsed. After its long opening improvisation, played by Beethoven on the piano, the composer apparently forgot having instructed the orchestra to omit the repeat. He took the repeat, and the result was chaos. Eventually, Beethoven and the orchestra started the piece over from the beginning. As different as they are in character, Beethoven wrote the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies at the same time. The Fifth Symphony inspired the earliest great work of music criticism, a review article of the published score written by E.T.A. Hoffmann in 1810. I encourage you to read the translation of Hoffmann's review on your course website for its perceptive comments about the music and its understanding of the wider romantic currents of Beethoven's music. At least since the 1830s, critics have pointed to the symphony's famous short, 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 long motive as fate knocking on the door. This motive can be heard in every movement of the intensely concise symphony. As numerous 19th century artists memorialized in paintings such as this one, Beethoven loved the countryside. Like many Viennese, he escaped there during the hot summer months. Even when living in the city, he took advantage of nearby parks. His Sixth Symphony, entitled the Pastoral Symphony, is as expansive as the Fifth Symphony is compact. Subdominant drones and lyrical repetitions replace the driving dominant tonic cadences and tight motivic construction of the Fifth Symphony. The Sixth Symphony also features a great deal of musical depiction, from the bird calls and babbling brook of its second movement to the rustic country dance and rain and lightning of the third and fourth movements. The act of depicting literal sounds in music has long been controversial. Practiced since at least the 17th century, some have believed that it is a misuse of music's expressive potential. Although including titles for the movements and even notating the names of birds heard calling in the second movement, Beethoven himself seems to have been uneasy with the musical painting that one might hear in the Sixth Symphony. In Sketches for the Work he wrote the following, quote, "It is left to the listener to discover the situation. Every kind of painting loses by being carried too far in instrumental music. Anyone who has the faintest idea of country life will not need many descriptive titles to be able to imagine for himself what the author intends. Even without a description, one will be able to recognize it all, for it is a record of sentiments rather than painting in sounds." This debate about musical expression would rage on through the 19th century. The Fifth and Sixth Symphonies of Beethoven are often seen as representing two touchstones of what music might be in terms of its expressive potential and in terms of how we interpret it.